This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 382 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. This one's a special Lumberjack Day episode of the podcast. Today's episode, along with next week's, come from live interviews I did during Three Sons Brewing's Lumberjack Day Fest in Dania Beach, Florida. A few weeks ago, Three Sons founder Corey Tartness was a guest on the podcast. I know it seems like a lifetime ago, January 2020, pre-pandemic. But we've remained friends, and when he asked me about conducting some interviews during the fest this year, I was intrigued by this vision for an internationally focused event with brewers from Japan, Canada, Ireland, Switzerland, Poland, Greece, and a whole bunch more. The fest itself was aesthetically cool, located in art space, large second floor gallery, full of interactive art installations. And of course, as expected, the hospitality the Three Sons provided for all of us attending, top notch. Today's episode is my interview with John Hoolihan of Brewlihan Meadery. They are currently ranked the number 5 brewery in the world on Untapped. Obviously, there's a little bit of thumb on the scale for meaderies there. Crazy. We talk about that in the episode. But still, nonetheless, interesting. To have such a highly rated brewery or meadery in this case. I'm excited to share that interview with you in a minute. Next week's episode will be made up of shorter interviews I did with some very smart folks like Alex Laws of Whiplash in Ireland, Greg Zeman of Stu Mostov and Wrocław, Poland. So stay tuned for that next week. Before we start this episode, I just want to share some thoughts and prayers for everyone affected in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina by Hurricane Helene, and now Florida again with Hurricane Milton. Western North Carolina, it holds a special place in my heart. As I was a kid, we vacationed outside of Asheville every summer while I was growing up. I've spent plenty of time tubing and rafting in the French Broad River, lounging in the Shenandoah River, seeing the destruction and flooding that they've caused and just what that has done to lives, homes, and breweries in the area. It's just heartbreaking. And the knock-on effects from the storm have put a lot of great brewers out of work, and a lot of folks that work in the brewing industry are now having to find ways to make a living. And we all need to do what we can to help those businesses and those individuals rebuild. For those who want to get more involved, there's an extensive list of resources at drinkncbeer.org, and there's even a displaced workers and jobs forum at brewersassociation.org. I encourage everyone who can to get in there and see what ways are possible to help. With Hurricane Milton, the impacts are still unfolding as I record this. My parents rode out the storm. I talked to them this morning. They rode out the storm in this house I grew up in Central Florida. I talked to them this morning. They said it was the worst storm they've experienced in over 50 years of living in Florida. I texted briefly this morning with CBB co-founder John Bolden, who now lives down in Vero Beach, and he reported that they are safe, but many of their neighbors and their friends are not so lucky. Tornadoes ripped through the area, destroying homes of friends, wiping out entire neighborhoods. I mean, we will not know the full extent of the damage and destruction for days or weeks, but we will stay on top of this and see what relief efforts we can support and what our community brewers might do to help in even just our own small way. But the state of Florida will absolutely need our help and our support. It's an incredibly difficult situation, but let's all do what we can to support, and we'll have more news and opportunities as that unfolds. On a lighter note, if you're a brewer in Denver for the Great American Beer Festival and you hear this in time, shoot me an email for a link to tickets to your super secret Brewers Tiki Party put on by Bierstadt Lagerhaus and the Bagbies on Saturday night of JABF. We've jumped in to help sponsor the party this year and make sure that this beautiful tradition lives on and the spirit of community and fun exists right here alongside the Great American Beer Festival. My email, of course, jbogner, JBOGNER, at beerandbrewing.com. Like I said, it's Brewers Party. It's for brewers. And so send me an email. I'll send you a link for tickets. And hopefully we can enjoy some tiki cocktails at a secret spot at Bierstadt on Saturday night. All right, before we jump into the interviews at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take my word for it.
This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5-barrel pub system up to our production brewery, we've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high-quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it.
Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring on your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is excited to now offer 2 to 4 week lead times on all in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers and seamers. These models are available in 100 to 300 can per minute filling speeds and are built with a focus on scalability and low dissolved oxygen pickup. This special lead time is only while supplies last, so send them an email at contactus@probrew.com or call them at 262-278-4945. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, Old Orchard has supplied flavored craft juice concentrate blends to over 46 states for the production of fruit-forward beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, and more. By partnering with some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape, Old Orchard has become a go-to source of fruit-forward ingredients. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. For this first of our Lumberjack Day sessions, podcast sessions, joining me for this conversation, which is theoretically live in front of an audience of beer festival goers, but our room right now has no one watching us because everyone has just started drinking for the VIP hour here at Three Sons Lumberjack Day at the Mad Arts Center. Let me set the stage for you. We are on the second floor of the Mad Arts Center. We are surrounded on this floor by art installations. It's an unbelievably cool setup here in a very unique location and place for a beer festival. And we may hear haunting dulcet tones in the background from some of the installation art pieces. It almost feels like mermaids singing behind us. Anyway, joining me for this very first session, Lumberjack Day session, is John Hoolihan from Brewlihan Meadery. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
And so, we don't have a lot of mead makers on the podcast typically, but, we were, Corey from Three Sons suggests that we have this conversation because you're also a podcast listener, and you also have the number 5 ranked brewery meadery in the world on Untapped, which is an unusual, other than there's the meadery is just kind of there's a little curve there, they get graded on a special curve there, but not to take anything away from you, not to take anything away at all. But nonetheless, curious to see what it takes to make mead that gets elevated to that kind of level. But why don't you just kick things off and give me some of your story? What led you down this pathway?
Absolutely. Great question. So I have always been involved in craft beer. I've been a craft beer nerd since, homebrewing as a college student. I thought I could buy or brew it cheaper myself than I could buy it. And if you looked at my bank account these days, that was an incorrect statement, to say the very least. I went to school and became an educator. I spent around 10 years in the elementary school classroom teaching every grade from kindergarten to 5th grade. I had a great mentor. I loved my job. I enjoyed making a difference in the lives of kids and families. And very soon after I taught a year of 5th grade, one of my administrators said, "You would make a great school-based leader." And who was I to argue? Fortunately, that system paid for me to experience and earn a master's degree in school administration. Became a school administrator for a couple years and was still dabbling in homebrewing, waiting in lines outside of J. Wakefield overnight and doing my best to walk up and down that line, sharing my personal experimentations that were taking place in my back room. Throughout this process, people would always ask if I was going to open, and the answer was absolutely positively no. Was never something that was even on the radar for us. It was a hobby, and that was all it was going to continue to be. And then I was wrong. So I started winning a lot of local events. It felt like not only did we impress judges, but every event that we went to, we started developing this cult-like following locally, and they were fantastic people that just enjoyed seeing us out. So we would win People's Choice wherever. It started to become kind of a laughing joke with some of the locals that if we entered, they knew they could predict who was going to win. At that point in time, I was doing mostly beer. a lot of barrel-aged stouts. And mead was just this side thing that I like to drink because my wife loves it, and everybody knows, happy wife, happy life. Made a mead, and it was double pear vanilla. So it's Bosch and Bartlett pear and Tahitian vanilla beans with a little bit of local wildflower honey. It's a fantastic one. It put us on the map, and we were giving it out to friends and family. I think the first batch was 50 bottles. Somehow, some way, someone online got a hold of it and wrote a 2,000-word essay, just absolutely waxing poetic about it. And it lit a fire on the internet. And we started to receive about 5 to 10 messages a day asking, how do we acquire this? And simply stated, we said, we're not a licensed meadery. We can't sell to anyone. Thank you. But the answer is you can't. So you know how it works. You tell somebody they can't have something, and it makes them want it.
It just creates a black market for it.
Exponentially.
Sure.
So
next thing you know, your friends want to trade you some things for that mead that you made.
Never happened ever.
Yeah.
Nope, never ever. So fast forward a little bit. Eventually, I told my supervisor that I was going to pursue a passion. My wife and I were fortunate. We both have great jobs. And I looked at her one day and I said, baby, take a risk on me. I'll never make you, or we'll never fail because of a lack of effort on my behalf. So in January 21, we signed a commercial lease for just over 1,700 square feet, about 20 minutes from where we're recording right now. It's called Oakland Park. A lot of people may know it because Funky Buddha has their massive production facility just 4 blocks from us. It took 18 months for us to have a build out. And then we started production on or around August of 22. Started with a private membership, filled 250 members in just about an hour online, and told my wife, turn it off. I don't know what we can do. This is just a me thing. So that was just awesome. It took us 6 months additional to work with the city to get on-site tasting room. So since around, I don't know, let's say June of 20, my calendar's messed up internally. August of 22, we opened our tasting room, something around those lines. And it's been a wild ride ever since. I love it, but I can't wait to talk some technical stuff rather than just the kind of background.
Sure. Well, for Brewlihan, obviously you came out as a beer maker also, and you decided to focus on mead. Talk to me about like dialing in that creative focus and why you decided to specialize in that way. Like there's got to be commercial element to it, but there also has to be a creative outlet as well.
A lot of the times I love the fact that mead, I feel, is more tinkerable, if that is a word that we can make up on the spot. Beer, it comes out, you can adjunct it in certain ways, minimizing oxygen exposure. But at the end of the day, I felt like I had more adaptability with mead. I felt like, number one, like you said, in terms of commercial aspect, there wasn't anybody doing mead in general. When I opened, there was one open smaller than us in Dade, nothing beyond going over to the Tampa side. So I saw additional opportunity though. A lot of the times what we know as mead in the mead connoisseur world is your dessert sweet, pastry thick mead. But I knew that living in Fort Lauderdale, you can only serve somebody so much of a product that tastes like maple syrup, basically. So we started a kind of a side brand, or just utilizing a little bit of carbonation, lower ABV, kind of a hydromel or session mead, if you will. But we use a lot of local ingredients, and our goal is to make something that you can not only have poolside on your boat, but it's something people can enjoy on the daily basis alongside pairings with meals. So what I saw was the parallel aspect of how beer is a drink that everybody knows and identifies with. I saw opportunity within mead because it was razor thin in terms of the definition amongst at least the people that I spoke with on a daily basis.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about how you then set up, because it's also, honey can be a pretty expensive fermentable to then use in a context like this, where people are also now then price comparing it against, potentially against other, hard seltzers that, let's just be perfectly honest about that. Like dextrose and sucrose are just a lot less expensive to ferment than something like honey.
So one of the things that we do is not only are we taking a passion, but we're also aware of the marketplace and the playground or sandbox that we're currently in. Being a part of Three Sons Lumberjack is something that it's an absolute honor. It's 50 of the top amongst not only national, but international. So we're honored to be here. One of the other things that we do is we know that every time we're in front of people, our goal is to bring them a product that's going to get them inspired, talking about us, converted, if you will, because there's a lot of people that are walking around on the first floor right now that have no idea what mead is. If they see something that is nearly fluorescent orange in visual appearance, it gets people talking. That's what we want, is we want to generate a buzz. We want them excited, coming to the table and then trying it. And two of our people that are downstairs, my wife and one of our buddies, Michael, absolute ambassadors, because you said it. I could use dextrose. I could use something much cheaper. But we feel that honey brings a magical component to it. Is it the star of that one? Absolutely not. But we know our marketplace. Within our meadery itself, our tasting room, we do our best to try to show the consumer that honey's regional. So our base for our session meads is called Buzz. Buzz is served off dry. It's always aged on just a touch of American oak, which gives it some vanilla components, but more so than that, we're pulling some tannin and structure from those oak cubes that are medium toasted. Every time Buzz is packaged, we're adding and bringing it to a final gravity of just about 1.002 specific gravity. So it's just a touch of back sweetening, but that touch allows the consumer to see that every time we make that, it's starring a different honey. So we've used everything from local wildflower, which is going to give it a floral component, to a local orange blossom that's going to add a touch of citrus on the back end. Right now we have one from Hawaii called Lahua Blossom, and it's pineapple. It's beautiful. And a lot of the time that's the true star of the show. That is beauty and simplicity. It's brilliant in the glass without any fining or filtering. We're just patient. We make a lot of it at one point in time, so we can afford to let some kegs kind of cold lager and clarify. Nothing worse to me than something that's visually and not appealing, because I believe that we taste with our eyes before it even meets our lips. So like I say, it's always kind of that beauty and simplicity with Buzz. And that line has not been popular with our membership. It's not been popular with our direct-to-consumer retail sales. Where it's popular is in the tasting room, where you do have people that say, what do you have that closely resembles a lager? And kind of going back to that honey-based fermentation, I don't have the scientific empirical data that supports it, but I definitely have some research under my belt. For some reason, because honey is just that higher quality sugar component, the hangover is non-existent. And as much as I would love to market that to our people, I don't have anything that reinforces it.
It's funny how the TTB and FDA don't really like claims like that out there, especially ones that can't be scientifically verified. But that's there you go. There's your interesting argument there.
Put good stuff in, good stuff comes out.
I think that is 100% true. We'll be back in a sec with more of the interview, but first, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. Perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-Star Chemicals. Their cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries, ensuring that your equipment stays clean and free of harmful bacteria and contaminants. From cleaning fermenters to kegs, they've got a solution for every step of the brewing process. Use 5-Star Chemicals today and taste the difference in your brews. Also, RSS Macklin, a family-owned company started by the head of Seaming Tech from PS Angeles and SME and a field service tech for Ball Corp, offers audits and repairs for can seamers and can integrity training. With experience from big breweries, they bring valuable knowledge to craft businesses. They provide solutions for can damage, seam training, and help your facility become self-sufficient without relying on OEMs. If you have any questions regarding your machine setup parameters or concerns about your can line, call them at 330-299-8210 or email at service@rssmacklin.com. That's rssmaclin.com. Now, back to the conversation. I'm curious about this. So Buzz is this kind of base for these that you have a common process around, but then you vary the honey ingredient, the specific type of honey, allowing people to kind of keep all the variables in one place and change that. And that one is basically a just off dry session strength, geared for tasting in place for people that don't want to drink a whole bunch of 12 or 15% things.
Yes. So in our tasting room, we have two different levels or types of mead that we serve alongside some traditional wines as well as in-house made ciders. So our serum line is an in-house branding term that basically denotes to the customer that it's going to be sub 7% alcohol. Typically speaking, the majority of our serum line is 5.51 to 5.3. We find that that's the sweet spot. Not hesitating there. We find that that's the spot where our consumers are able to enjoy without feeling limited by something that was pushing that 7-8 or traditional mead strength, which is 12 to 14. So the serum line all starts with Buzz. Buzz is just a neutral base. When it actually is served to the consumer is when we start to play around with different honeys. And then, yes, there is a different process for each of them, but right now we're pretty experimental in nature. We repeat.
So when you say neutral base, just so
Yes.
I'm totally clear on this, are you building that neutral base with these different honeys, or is that neutral base, or are you back sweetening then with these specific honeys?
Yes. So
I just want to be clear.
No, that's awesome. I love the clarity. So when we ferment our base for our serum line, it is always using local honey. We really think that it's important to give back kind of just not only to the community, but it's nice to be able to hand a check to somebody versus putting stuff on freight. Honey's expensive, and we're going through an awful lot of it at this point.
So you're a small business, and you can still source it that way. And, people also will pay the premium to consume that, because they are there for that brand expectation.
So Buzz's base always starts with local honey. And then when we are about to package it as Buzz, that's when we'll start to pull in and utilize different regional honeys or pollen sourced honeys so that we can bring a different final product to the consumer. You're talking less than a gallon of honey in a 2-barrel batch for back sweetening purposes. So just a hair to keep it there, and because it's nearly bone dry, it does become the star of the show with that little bit of a pop from the American oak cubes. On the total opposite end of the spectrum, outside of the Buzz line, our second ability is really producing the high ABV meads that are more traditionally associated with the genre. Those are always done in a really methodical way. As a former math and science teacher, I nerd out on process, and I'm obsessed with the quality that's going in because, kind of like I said before, quality in, quality out. When I first made mead, my first 2 batches were cough syrup. They were absolutely terrible. So I sought out books by Ken Schramm. I devoured every piece of information that I could, which is what kind of led me to your podcast, because there's overlap in terms of taste profile, process, very closely related, but there are definitely some differences on the mead side of things. So when I'm aiming or kind of following this flow chart for how am I going to be intentional about where my end goal is, it always starts with trying the honey. Do I know that I want to do different things like blueberry, blackberry, etc.? Yes, but I was kind of groomed and taught that the honey is first and foremost the star of the show. So I'll try certain honeys and pick up certain nuances and flavor, and rather than try to take them in a different direction, lean in on that.
Sure.
And almost so then after I'm trying the honeys and picking up certain flavor profiles, we're not only we're including that on the roadmap, but then we're also continuing to push it in the direction that it's already demonstrating through the use of different yeasts. So I know a lot of mead makers, and they'll have a house yeast per se. There's 14 different types of yeast right now that are in our facility.
Wow.
And the first thing, if you have listeners out there that are saying, how do I figure out what yeast to use with certain honeys? There's a book called the Scott's Lab Handbook, and I downloaded it. They'll send you a free copy to your house. And what I did was I took colored pencils, and at the top of every page, there's almost like a descriptor, right? And I created a legend. If it was floral, I would highlight it yellow. If it was citrus, orange, berry, it would be blue or purple, and kind of worked through the list. And anytime I saw those words within the handbook, it describes each yeast, what temperature it should ferment at, what max ABV is it capable of, and it'll give you some history on where this specific yeast was developed, cultivated, etc. Those are two things that I think make us different than a lot of your commercial meaderies that are just throwing, a super neutral yeast DV10 at something and trying to strip all the flavor for max ABV, or something like EC 1118. Those are, there's not the nuance that you're going to get off of them. So our full strength starts with different honeys every time. And then from there, we're either using fresh fruit in primary, we're using purees in primary, and we'll also use steam juice. So basically a concentrate, if you will. All three of those sources come in primary. Primary for us takes around 28 days. We're low and slow, always on the bottom range of the yeast profile, because I don't want a lot of the esters from the yeast. What I really want is I want the honey. And then as we start
tell me about that a little bit. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm curious about this because, honey with so many delicate aromatic components can be outcompeted by yeast ester. But then also, I would assume that vigorous fermentation and a fermentation, we all know how, as you're producing alcohol and producing CO2, you're also driving off these aromatics. And the last thing you want to do is lose all of this, the beautiful things that come from, this delicate honey in that whole process. While at the same time, as you're having to heat things up in order to, get honey to flow and to get it into a solution that can be fermented. Like there's so many points where you can damage the flavor and aromatics of honey. What are some of the ways that you kind of protect that on the front end of this fermentation process?
So from a business perspective or standpoint, I love that you're asking that question. That isn't what we get to do the most of, unfortunately. It's the thing, though, that as a producer, that's what almost like that is what gets me most excited. I love the fact that we get to utilize what I feel is the world's most exquisite form of sugar, and protecting kind of the work that goes in behind the scenes, because honey it's a laborious process, and these guys are underpaid 100%, and you have all sorts of like kind of adulterants out there that you're not getting pure honey. And everybody's seen those articles that kind of pop up on their social media. But I want to make sure that I'm doing justice. So when we're talking just honey, yeast, water, and you're making a traditional mead, no fruit, that is something that we're fortunate. So you spoke about the strong amount of CO2 off-gassing that occurs with mead, and specifically with fermenting mead utilizing wine yeast. I don't get the krausen that a lot of the breweries do. We've seen the pictures where they have the garbage bin and it's completely overflowing with yeast and trub. With mead, my fermentation is very petulant, almost looking from the top. A lot of small little explosions, but nothing. I'm not getting that coagulation of protein that you are with a beer-based fermentation. So I'm fortunate for a couple of reasons. I can maximize the amount that's in the tank, which helps, but also I don't have to worry about that massive CO2 exposure or that CO2 release. Because I'm fermenting low and slow, I think that it holds true a lot of the flavors in honey. I also think that even if you're fermenting a honey bone dry, there's still so much character and nuance. A lot of the time, I've brought bone dry things to different local events because everyone, you tell them, do you want to drink dry or sweet? They immediately are, oh no, we like dry stuff. Even if it's bone dry and they're picking up honey, that perceived sweetness is there. So my favorite is the traditionals, especially being able to showcase the regional influence and also just how cool honey can be. Now the problem or challenge is those are typically the brands that do not excite the general consumer as much.
Sure.
So it's a tightrope walk, if you will.
Sure. So then when you are matching yeast then to these strains, you are trying to find complementary flavor esters, aromatic pieces, that are going to highlight those things. Are there particular yeasts in this that you tend to lean towards because they seem to just continually, produce better flavor, better aroma for you?
I have favorites, but the most challenging thing for me is we're 2 years in. So I have my preferences, or let's even backtrack further than that. Let's say as a home brewer, I had my preferences because I thought, I'm small scale. I can have 30 different sachets of yeast here. It's not a problem. And I did one by one experiments. So the very first thing that I did in order to kind of train myself was I did 31 gallon batches side by side in my back room. My wife is a saint. And the exact same temperature, the exact same starting gravity. And what that allowed me to do was immediately say, I taste this versus what is the description saying. And that was beneficial because I took those favorites and I scaled them up. And that was working great. And then I did my first commercial batch. That was 330 gallons. And it did not behave the same way. So what the pro aspect, or let's say commercial, because I'm definitely not a professional here, the commercial aspect has taught me that I have some go-tos, specifically like if I am utilizing berry forward, I'm picking a certain yeast. If I am making a traditional and I just want to taste the honey and I want to protect the sanctity of the honey, that is one yeast. If I am chasing ABV, that's another yeast. So I definitely have favorites that I like to lean into. But one of the coolest parts that we still have is even though we now are producing a whole lot more, I still have the same 4 15-gallon tanks with little Blickman kind of controller coils in them and Inkbirds that I can do 15-gallon. That's where I do a lot of the independent experimentation. So whether it's 2 honeys side by side, what's the difference? How does this taste? And that's really, it's been an awesome experience, not only to allow myself to learn that way, but it's also really beneficial when it comes to educating staff or consumers that are really interested in it.
We'll be back with more in a sec, but first, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorient Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroir, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling, thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors Fresh strains keep diacetyl low even with large hop additions. Tropic strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops, and they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off your first order. Now, back to the interview. Mead fermentation is always has its own challenges, different from beer fermentation, obviously, because there's the nutrient question. Doesn't have the same kind of enzymes inherent that come from a barley mash, and so and then that whole process of feeding a nutrient has other potentials to specifically create some flavors that are maybe a little less desirable potentially in that kind of mead fermentation. What are some of the biggest things that you've learned scaling this and doing it on a professional level, as opposed to a homebrew level? Now you have the pressure of time, and you have that pressure, the pressure of consistency, because consumers, you're now creating brands, and people expect those brands to be things now. Where when it was homebrewed mead, it can be a new thing every time, and that's perfectly fine. What were some of those biggest kind of learning curves that you had to tackle with that?
That was layered right there. That was a good question. I'm looking at this from a listener's perspective over here, Jamie. So you talked about a lot there. All right, let's start at the beginning. Or not that one.
That's the way I ask
questions.
I
like it.
I ask you like 10 questions, pile it all into one.
I can take it where I want.
Just go whichever direction.
Playing tennis here. So first and foremost, for people that are out there that are trying to make mead or trying to at least improve their process, Jamie hit the nail on the head. It's most difficult at the beginning or the onset of fermentation. And it's quite possibly the most important part of what we do if you want to avoid, you said it really nicely, it was undesired flavors. That's nice. So we have to make sure.
There's no off flavors anymore. They're just attributes.
Yeah, that's it.
There's attributes and thresholds, And
hold on, we're gonna take this off. I need a marketing guy. So first and foremost, the important part about what we do is starting the fermentation off in a healthy capacity, and we are really, really methodical about that process that we take because it's most important. And like you said, we're not dealing with small batches anymore. So you want to do everything you can do to create the situation where mead is going to be happy. I want my yeast to be happy because happy yeast is going to equate to better tasting final product. We use a product called GoFirm, and GoFirm is basically like a yeast nutrient that almost helps at the onset of fermentation. You combine GoFirm with extremely hot water, and I just learned downstairs talking to another mead maker, they now have a product you don't need to use hot water on. So that's one of the reasons why you come to these events. You learn different things from different people. So you allow this GoFirm to drop to a certain temperature. We just do it at about 100 degrees, and we add the yeast from there. You allow the yeast to start blooming, almost like, if I was to speak in parallels, building a yeast starter as a home brewer. And then throughout the process, we're acclimating the base mead temperature to the temperature of the yeast starter or slurry that I have created. So we're using a 5-gallon bucket at the meadery. We start with maybe a gallon of 130 degree water, try to get that GoFirm really mixed in pretty well, and then let it free fall to about 100 degrees. When you hit 100, you can add your yeast, and then from there, just about every 10 minutes, we're feeding that base batch. So I have a little port on the front of the fermenter, drop a little bit in there, and wait 10 minutes. Continue to add off of the main batch into this 5-gallon bucket, and just about the time that 5-gallon bucket is full, the temperature of the yeast starter is within about 5 degrees Fahrenheit of my base batch. One of the best podcasts that I ever listened to kind of compared it to as an adult now, when I get into a pool, I go in one step at a time. I'm too old to jump in. So that's exactly what I'm doing, is I'm setting that mead up, or that yeast up, for success before it even enters the vessel where fermentation will occur. We're also making sure that we're feeding on a consistent basis. Right now, we utilize a fermentation or a feeding schedule of 24, 48, and 72 hours. And we're utilizing a product that helps with fermentation. It's Fermado, and people take it either organic or inorganic. And the process that we have basically done from the time we were homebrewers to now, it's nearly identical. I, as a math guy, chart every single one out on the front of the tank. And I will say that I see differences in terms of scale, but not enough to change practice. So as a home brewer, I was never feeding with pure oxygen. I was not oxygenating my tanks. I did an internship before I opened at an awesome meadery out in California. And the very first question I wanted to talk about was oxygen. And he didn't use it. I did not use it when I started. And now we are utilizing it. And I am seeing that with proper oxygenation, I am seeing better final results. You earlier in the question spoke about fermentation speed. When we first opened, we opened with 2 10-barrel tanks and 4 5-barrel tanks. The 10s were utilized for the serum line I spoke of earlier, so just session base. The 4 5s were utilized for high gravity brewing. What I never had to worry about at the beginning was how quickly can I turn this tank? Because with beer, most of your fermentation is taking place over the course of around 3 weeks, if not sooner. With mead, I'm going as long as 28 days at times, and even longer when I'm utilizing step feeding and adding additional sugars during the fermentation process. So that's just going to lengthen the timeline between initial pitch and transference out of that tank into a barrel or an additional aging tank. Now that situation has changed. We have scaled up. We are now in our second year of production. We're getting deeper into distribution and some other projects that have required us now to look at creation of a more tight production schedule. I'm able to lean back on some of the scheduling that I did as an elementary assistant principal. So it's beneficial, but I had never stress tested the building until about a month ago. And I was creating a schedule and saying, okay, this is how long I think it should take, and started to build parameters about that. Now with our new process from, let's just call it day 0, mixing honey, yeast, water, and pitching, it takes 16 days for us to hit terminal gravity, but that also includes hitting it with some bentonite, which is a clarifier. And then we are also on our session base utilizing potassium metabisulfate and potassium sorbate so that we can back sweeten that prior to packaging, whether that's a little bit of honey for buzz or a whole lot of fruit for maybe one of our other SKUs that we're going to put out. So from day 0 to 16 fermentation, spending less than 12 hours in the bright tank for the most part, and packaging. So we are really happy with the trajectory, because initially we thought we under-purchased equipment, and because we were utilizing that 28-day schedule, and lo and behold, we're well positioned at this point in time.
Nice. Well, I want to kind of pivot the conversation now and talk about building flavor, because that's a big thing. You have some strong opinions about this. You describe flavor as this triangle. As we know, and the stereotypical idea of mead today amongst the hypier side of this is very sweet, very flavor intensive, and and yet at the same time, there are ways to both provide that sweetness and provide balance with that sweetness in a way that can kind of support and ground it so that it can still be drinkable without just being like completely cloying. I say this all the time to folks. Like, my problem isn't with things that are too sweet. My things, it can have the same amount of sugar in it, and it can still be that beautiful, satisfying, and intense. But it needs to have other things to support those kinds of flavors. Talk to me about your approach, to flavor, and then how you think about layering these pieces together. And maybe we can talk about, one or two specific, meads that you've made where some of these kind of mechanics, have been at work, and how you made some of these decisions along the way to kind of, build, amplify, and support, the kind of the strong flavors in them. Again, another sprawling question that, on all sorts of corners there.
I love it. It works well with my ADHD. So let's take it through and kind of level set and create a common language before I delve into product base. So one of the things that we have on our menu that was initially designed to be friendly and help educate the consumer when they weren't interacting with a representative from the brand, and I say that like we're big, there's like 3 of us there, there were these small hash marks next to each and every flavor, whether it was a serum or a full strength mead. And the more tick marks or hash marks next to the flavor, it was supposed to indicate residual sugar. So it was something that I love to have on there, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So a lot of the time, and I've taught this now to every single person that has sat down and asked me about residual sugar, because they do attribute mead to being a sweeter beverage. So I'm a New Yorker originally, upstate, and I talk with my hands. It's my mom. I love you. So I always put up and create a triangle. And at the very tip of the triangle, I say that a lot of the time people talk about balance, and balance to me is 2-dimensional. Whereas what I really try to seek out as a producer is I'm looking for something that has structure, and it's 3-dimensional. At the top of that triangle is the sugar source. That's the sweet. It's what everybody knows. It's what we like. I looked around the room before I said this, and we're all Americans here. We've grown up on sugar. We love it. It's a fantastic thing. But with sugar alone, and imagine the top of that triangle was to the ceiling, and the other 2 vertices of that triangle were non-existent. You just basically have a straight line, and that straight line that Jamie talked about, when it is too sweet and it lacks other things, I call that flabby. It's Laffy Taffy. It is straight sugar, and by itself, it's pretty disgusting. It does not create a great experience for the consumer. On the bottom 2 vertices, first one that I always like to talk about, it would be tannin. You're going to say that tannin comes from a couple different sources. First one could be oak tannin. It also can come from fruit skins. Tannin is really difficult for people to pick up initially. They'll almost say dry is something that they associate with tannin. It has that drying feature on the sides of the cheeks. It's what really kind of keeps the consumer coming back for that next sip. When you hit that perfect level of tannin where it's there, but they may not even notice it. The other vertice, the final corner of that triangle, you have is tartness, and tartness is mostly going to come from your fruit sources, or if you are the type of mead maker that likes to use certain acids to adjust on the back end. When you create that triangle and it becomes equilateral in nature, every single one of those flavor components, sweet, tart, tannin, are all utilized at the right level, you hit a home run. The consumer is not going to describe it as too sweet, because the tartness and tannin are taming that sugar source, at least to their tongue. So it creates a really great experience. So now that we've kind of level set, we've talked about the importance of that, creating that 3-dimensional. Let's talk about what we do at our place, because It would be really awesome to sit here at the table and tell you that I am so skilled that every mead that comes out of primary, out of Brewlihan Mead Company, is perfect in those 3 capacities. And those, it does not happen. There are times where they are closer, and that's great, and you create home runs. But as someone who also creates commercially, you need to know how to adjust each of those indicators, almost as if they were an equalizer sitting in front of you, to make sure that you create the best final product that you can. So when it comes to your sugar sources, a lot of guys, they're utilizing honey to back sweeten. You can use neutral sugar sources as well. Everything from, you could use agave nectar. You could make a simple syrup, if you will. You could utilize things like maple syrup, contingent upon the product. There's a lot of different ways to get a sugar source in there. Tartness, you can use your different acids. So citric acid, malic acid, and tartaric acid. Those are the big 3 that people will use. There's
classic winemaker acid additions there.
There you go. And then there's the blend too. Never use the blend. I don't have any personal experience about it. For the most part, we are utilizing tartaric acid. We have done And that's probably one of my favorite days, but I don't think that people around me would describe it as I'm the most pleasant. We do a panel, and what we'll do is we'll basically break down 50 ml samples and create a 10% solution of each of those acids. And your very first round is trying, your citric, your malic, and your tartaric next to one another, and adding until you reach a point where you're happy with it. And then you can decide which of those three work best with your project that you're working on. From there, now we start to get even more granular. So we'll take that tartaric and we'll now start working on how many drops until we reach what we feel is a really good tartness that helps the other flavors to pop. And then sometimes that process will take place over a couple days before we package. Reason being, your taste buds will change throughout the day. If you're trying something after you've eaten a certain meal, it may create a different experience on the taste buds. So what we're really trying to do at the end of the day is ensure that if we are making adjustments, they're well informed. So we may go 3 days just taking these samples and adding differing levels of the 10% base until we reach as a team what we feel like is the best final product.
Well, that's interesting. You still test those different acids to see how they might express within, with the other ingredients, especially if it's something new like that.
So let's talk about one in particular that we played around with recently. We did one. So all of our branding, all of our naming kind of goes back to that science and math aspect of my previous lifetime. So we do a monatomic when it is one fruit. We do one called diatomic anytime we use 2 fruits, triatomic, so on and so forth, right? So we just put out
You're such a nerd.
Yeah, hey. I was going to counter with something, but I'm going to take it because I'm going to lean in on it. Triatomic, strawberry, blueberry, raspberry.
Yeah.
Perfect blend. Said everything went great. Let's fill a couple barrels. And one of the things that we did off of the bat, because our barrel age stuff, barrels and the micro oxidation, also the tannin component from actual wood that's only exposed in terms of surface area to a small fraction creates this micro oxidation, combined with the fact that the barrels are breathing. It's cheat codes for mead for the most part. It also is really awesome as a beginning facility because how much stainless could we afford when we first opened, really? I can buy a couple
Those are some cheap vessels, right?
That's
there.
right. And we stacked them to the ceiling, and it was half of the production would go into stainless and the other half would fill barrels every time we made a batch for our first 2 years. So we're sitting on like 50 full barrels, which is awesome for sampling, blending, etc. We did one called Triatomic. We sent the majority of it to Elijah Craig 12-year, and we sent a small component of it to a 15-gallon maple rye. We love the small barrels because we can turn them faster. It helps put the mead into our membership. It puts it in the hands of the consumer quicker. So when that one came out, strawberry is tough. And we have great strawberry farms near us, but post-fermentation, it just wasn't something I was willing to put 200 pounds of strawberry hoping to get a little bit more strawberry characteristic. But I did notice it was on the flabbier side. So as we kind of argued amongst the three guys, I said, you know what, the first thing I'm noticing is the fruit is muted, and so we immediately said, is it missing tartness or tannin? And it just came out of the barrel, and it has a great barrel structure that the tannin is there. So we're missing tartness. So let's pull out those acids and let's see what we can do to kind of massage this flavor. And it's a developed skill, but everybody knows what their preference is. And I often tell people who apologize to us sitting at our bar, and they're like, oh, I haven't had this, I'm not an expert. I'm like, you don't have to be an expert to know what you like as a person. We'll argue about that tartness level, but one of the things we've started to notice now is we're buying the best corks that we can. A lot of our people, they'll buy bottles just like a wine collector, and they're going to sit on their shelves. As much as I say, when I put it in the bottle, it's ready for you to drink. Some of them just like to collect. Some of them, they have an extensive collection or cellar. So I want to make sure that is going to present well, not only the day I package it and months afterwards, but I'm hoping for what I hope is maybe up to 15 years afterwards. Our corks are rated for 10 years, but I have noticed that products that have the right amount of tartness, that's usually the first thing that falls off with mead that people are aging. So I want to make sure that there's enough in there that if they open it 2-3 years down the road, it hasn't turned into blackberry jam that has
right.
that they're going to put on their toast.
Well, John, we've been talking a little while here. Maybe just as a to kind of pull this all together, talk to me about one of the projects that has most excited you. Creatively, functionally, technically, something that helped you learn about something new about mead making, or about the way that flavor and structure can work in a way that might have been interesting or surprising. What's something that really excited you lately?
One of the things that has really got me super excited isn't something that maybe most consumers would be excited about. It's the scientific side of things. So you said it earlier, I'm a nerd. And you said this earlier too, you were talking about when you're a home brewer and you make a different batch every time. Every time someone comes in our tasting room, especially our regulars, it's what's new. So you want to be on that cutting edge. And sometimes you build events like our soda event, where we had everything from the orange pop you were enjoying to the root beer versions and cream sodas. And those things, as gimmicky as they are, they're one and dones. So you don't create this, I need to hit spec, or this needs to be the same on batch 1 as it is on batch 200. We haven't had the luxury of this long timeline where we are going into just creating core brands. We're one-offs a lot of the time. And we have now taken on and realized we're at a point now where we can create some cores. We have this longitudinal data of what are the big 5 sellers, what are the ones that we've brought back because people continue to ask for them. So for me, I still am at these events and feel like the home brewer. It's not a terrible imposter syndrome. There's one other meadery here. And we share best practice, but he's on my phone in a group chat already. It's a small industry, but there are a lot of technical things that I take away from this from the brewing side. Things as simple as Azam. Now that we are scaling up and really hitting, we want to make sure that product that goes into any market is our best representation of ourselves. Now that we're repeating those cores, it's really awesome for me to have these data sets where every Monday we're starting a 20 barrel batch, and watching and tracking 8 tanks simultaneously is a awesome experience, because I feel like we've been doing this now for 2 months. So that's just about 10 of these batches under my belt. I'm learning so much because I can easily spot things that are occurring and troubleshoot from there. And we're only 10 batches in. So I feel like it's hit fast forward. But also, I think just having a low ego and not being afraid to ask things. So many tips that I picked up from yours, but I'll call the local guys and bounce things off of them and say, it's not exactly the same, but what would you do if? Moving product around. I feel like we're now hitting a point where I feel confident in process within the brewery and within the meadery, even when it comes to limiting oxygen exposure during transfers. And those are things that just weren't on my radar as somebody who started in the back room on a couple 15-gallon fermenters.
Sure. Well, again, as we typically would, close a segment of the podcast, where do you hope to be in 3 years? What do you hope in 5 years? You're 2 years in, it's still young. You're riding this wave of excitement, and you have this energy. People are seeking you out because you are so highly rated on Untappd. That creates a specific pressure. It creates an opportunity. You don't want to waste the opportunity that you have as a result of this, or take any of this for granted. And you also know that this phase won't last forever, and there's going to be a next phase for this business. What do you look for in the next 3 to 5 years?
There's a lot of potential out there for mead. I think that the thing that gets me most excited and where I would love to see Brewlihan in 3 to 5 years is just continuing to expand awareness. And I think that there's a couple attributes that we have as a brand that are beneficial to that. Number one, just our passion. Number two, the people that we bring on our team, we're very selective. They are the best people that you can ever have representing your brand. We create a culture and an atmosphere in our tasting room where it's not, I can't put it into words, but it's the coolest place because you have people that are so diverse sitting around and enjoying themselves, and it's such a nice feeling. But I want to take that, bottle it, and spread that knowledge. And I see us expanding production, but I also see opportunity in terms of consumer education. And I think that's the coolest part about our tasting room. And I think that's one of the reasons that we get the scores that we do, because you have people that come in and they say, oh yeah, I've never rated anything a 5, and they're showing me their phone. I'm like, I haven't looked at that in years. I can't do it. It hurts my ego. I don't take any faith in it. I have one of my members that updates all of the postings. But it's an honor. It creates this unrealistic expectation at times. But I also think that it's just a magical beverage that has so much adaptability. And whether you like dry, sweet, high ABV or low ABV, there's something that I can make in front of you that's a honey-based fermentation. And even if you don't drink, I'll put hot peppers and honey, and you can take home some hot honey to put on your pizza. So I see just a lot of opportunity for continued growth, whether that's through distribution, through alternative locations. But I think that right now, our biggest struggle to that is we're protective of the brand. We know what we have. When we know you can't just send hundreds of kegs into the market and hope that a bartender that may not have any long-term interest in it besides making some money during a shift is going to give customers a good experience with that. So I see continued consumer outreach, but also just spreading awareness of it and letting people know it's not one-dimensional, just like the dessert meat that we're known for. This is a product, number one, it's the best form of fermentable sugar, but also the taste profile on the session meads or the serums is so unlike a lot of the things that are out there right now. It's a small beverage that's produced with an intensity of flavor that is unparalleled.
Yep. If people want to try your mead in person, where do they find you? Where can they get their hands on Brewlihan mead?
One place only. We are in Oakland Park, Florida. That is about 10 minutes north of the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. We are a small little on-site facility. We do tastings. You can pick flights. If you don't have the privilege or fortune of flying over to Florida and you're one of 43 approved states, we do ship direct to consumer. Our website is brewlihan.com. That's Brewlihan. And we have lots of other cool things on there. We're on all of the channels. You name it, we're out there.
For sure. Well, John, it was really, really fun to talk to you about making mead here in Florida. Thanks for taking some time away from Three Sons Lumberjack Day Festival to sit up here in the theater and talk with me. Cheers.
Thank you, Jamie. As a longtime listener, it was an absolute honor and a pleasure.
Pleasure was all mine. Cheers. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew offers 2 to 4 week lead time on in-stock rotary can fillers and seamers. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast Daybreak 5 gives you juicy modern hop flavors without the haze. 5-Star Chemicals cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. And Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, support our mission to bring great brewing conversations, great and inspiring articles and technical details, and phenomenally sourced recipes for brewing your own versions of some of these inspiring beers through Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine and our Brewing Industry Guide and more. I'll be back next week with more interviews from Lumberjack Day. In the meantime, let's all keep our heads up and our eyes open for opportunities to help the victims of the hurricanes in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, also Tennessee. Much love to everyone working through all the challenges that those major storms have presented to us. But we'll be back next week with more interviews. Cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.